Hi, and welcome back to our video discussion. This is Sergio, and we now proceed to the next part of this semester's discussion. In our previous discussions, you have already understood the whole concept of what globalization is, and you have understood what happened to the world in the beginning of globalization, and what happened, what they did, what the world leaders did in answer to the conflicts and the struggles that we had because of our wanting to connect with each other, wanting to somehow dominate the world in the market, in politics, and all those things. Today we talk about market globalism, how the businesses, how the world interconnects with each other in the current situation. First, let us understand the concept of market globalization. In a definition provided by Manfred Streger, still the best person to go to in understanding what globalization is because of all his works and research with regards to globalization. He explains that it contains an ideological dimension filled with a range of norms, claims, beliefs, and narratives about the phenomenon itself. The phenomenon which is globalization. So with this, stating that there are norms, claims, beliefs, narratives, things that we do, things that are a result of what we think. With this, we need to understand how people think as a whole in terms of ideology, as what we understand what ideology is. Ideology is a system of widely shared ideas, patterned beliefs, guiding norms, and values, and ideals that are accepted as truths by certain groups of people. One thing that you have to take note with this definition of what ideology is that it is shared among people. So it doesn't mean it's shared by everyone, but it is shared by most people. In terms of most, what we're trying to say is, in numbers, there's a lot of people who believe in it. And aside from numbers, sometimes the authority matters, the power matters. When people impose that this is the truth, when authorities impose that this is the truth, it becomes the truth of other people as well. An ideology also, on each ideology, there's also a structured, or it is structured around core claims. There are core ideas, because there's a lot of things that we talked about in ideology, in a certain ideology, but there will always be common grounds, common beliefs, common things that people believe what that matter is, what that information should be, what that process should be. That is an ideology. There are certain core structures. More than that, while ideology would seem to have a certain common ground about certain ideas, ideologies somehow also distort things. It divides people somehow, but somehow it legitimizes the truth of many, the truth of some, and what is not true to other people as well. But bottom line, the purpose of ideology is to integrate the ideas of people. And this is where, in the concept of market globalism, we have to take note that in market globalism, it is a hegemonic, which means hegemony means there's somehow an imposition from certain people, an imposition from certain authority, imposition from a number of people, where ideas are imposed, and it creates normative claims about a set of social processes. And these social processes in market globalism is again what we call globalization. And remember that when we talked about globalization in the previous discussions, we always emphasized that globalization encompasses a lot of things. It encompasses politics, it encompasses economics, it encompasses our beliefs, our values, it goes down to our daily life. So market globalism or globalization as a whole is within all of the things that we do in our daily lives. It's part of society. It's part of our daily actions, our daily thinking, which leads us to understanding that if we want to understand market globalism, we also have to understand the thinking of society, the thinking of all people, of most people. How do we think? What is our social imaginary? When the social imaginary is what we describe as deep-seated modes of understanding that provide the most general parameters within which people imagine their communal existence. Communal existence is where we understand why we exist. For what do we exist? What is our common? What is our societal shared purpose of existence? What is our shared purpose in this world? And that is our social imaginary, our social way of thinking. Which now brings us to what we need to talk about in today's discussion. These are the 5 core claims of globalization, the 5 core beliefs of what market globalization is, of what globalization in the current world is. Number 1, globalization is about the liberalization and global integration of markets. There are 2 things that we have to discuss here. First, liberalization, from the root word liberty. When we say liberty, it's becoming free. What are we freeing? What things are we freeing in globalization? We are freeing the countries. We are freeing the countries from only dealing with trade within their countries, dealing with market processes within their country, doing business only within their country. So we are freeing them. We are letting them go out of their own perimeters, of their own box, of their own country, of their own geography, and go explore other parts of the country, do business there, sell there, get resources there, be liberalized, be free in doing that. And in being free, we also need to integrate, because there is no purpose, there's no point of being free from our country doing business outside if we are not allowed to integrate, if we are not allowed to do business in other countries as well. So this means that globalization has 2 things in the first core claim. First, we need to go out of our country, but then we also have to let other countries open up to other countries as well. So you as a country should explore out, and you as a country should also accept other businesses, other countries for doing business in your country. This is both an advantage and a disadvantage, as has been discussed in our previous discussion. An advantage for us to explore and expand, but also a challenge for us to maintain competitiveness against other countries who are large enough to pinch small businesses in our country as well. The second core claim of globalization is that it is inevitable and irreversible. Same thing that happened, it seemed to happen in one part of the Marvel universe, where it was inevitable that Thanos would snap his fingers and that there will be half of the population will be diminished. In that thought, we understand that globalization has always been there, deep-seated in our consciousness. We always wanted to expand. We always wanted to explore. Maybe not colonize, which we thought was the right thing to do, but then later understood colonization is not the way, but integration is. Collaborating with other countries is the way then. So with this, it's already there. We cannot stop that. No matter what happens in the world, globalization will always be there. In my previous discussions before the pandemic happened, I would always ask, what could possibly happen that would close the world, that would close the countries, each country, to other countries. And then the pandemic happened. And then we closed our borders to other countries. Until now, there are still countries that are not allowed to enter the Philippines. And sometimes the Philippines is not allowed to enter other countries as of the moment. Well, despite that, globalization is still happening. The exchange of products, the purchase, the sales of products is still there. The exchange of help, of community outreach, of giving help, of giving information, exchange of these things. The politics is still there. The values, the exchange of values of media, entertainment is still there despite closing the borders of each of these countries. So it is inevitable. You cannot reverse it that we go back to being alone. In fact, even the most communist countries, if we would have to identify North Korea being closed in borders to South Korea, they still connect with the world. They still join the Olympics. They still get resources from outside. Or maybe sell resources to outside countries. We still interconnect with them. Then globalization, interconnecting with countries, is really inevitable. It will be there. We cannot stop that. There's even one statement in the books that I have read about globalization, that globalization might be scary, but it is scarier if we don't join globalization. Number 3, with no picture, because nobody is in charge of globalization. And this statement is quite controversial and is on debate. Somehow, certain scholars would say there are certain countries controlling globalization. But truth is, if we exert our power, no matter how small a country is, nobody is really in charge of globalization. If we have to change that, then everybody is in charge of globalization. If everybody would act responsibly, if everybody would voice out their words, then we are in charge of globalization. Each one of us would direct what globalization should be, what countries should do for other countries, what other countries should not do to other countries. Not only in commerce, not only in business, but also in dealing with other races, like what's happening in the world right now when there is discrimination in Western culture, there's discrimination towards Eastern culture because of what's happening in the world. Even inside the country, there is discrimination inside Western cultures. So, the concept of globalization, the process of globalization is, or can be managed by, can be controlled by everyone if all majority people and minority people would just voice out their words in the proper way, in a scholastic way, in an academic way, in a knowledgeable way, in a responsible manner, then we will be in charge of globalization. It's not that one country would be in charge of globalization. The fourth claim of globalization is that in the long run, everybody will benefit from it. And there's one phrase in this sentence that you have to take note. In this phrase, which has been widely accepted by scholars already, it mentions that it is still in the long run. They claim, they recognize the fact that as of the moment, it is not everybody that's benefiting from globalization. Sometimes there's one country benefiting more in that country because of cheaper labor, because of cheaper product, because of easier processes in doing business. So they benefit from that country more than that country benefits from them. But in the long run, the goal of globalization is to let everybody enjoy the goodness of globalization, the benefits of globalization, the interchange of products, of help, of values, of goods, of resources, people and things, of ideas. So that would benefit everybody in the long run. The fifth claim of globalization then is that it furthers the spread of democracy in the world. And this is another point of debate and a point of somehow conflict, controversy in the concept of globalization. Because not all countries in the world are democratic. Some are federal, some are communist, some are still under a autocratic or are monopolized but by certain families, by certain monarchs. So not all countries embrace democracy. But one thing that globalization is bringing with itself is the concept of democracy, that everyone should decide, everyone should be given the opportunity to talk, to share their ideas, and then to share their opinions as well, and to talk on what they want with what's happening in the world, what they want in the processes of business, what they want in the processes of the government, of society. But then, somehow, we have to take note that democracy works well when people are well informed, very knowledgeable, and are responsible of their opinions as well. Because if not, imagine if you or me, including me, if we have to decide on how to let a rocket, a space shuttle, land at Mars and bring people, and we are not knowledgeable about it, but we are asked of opinions on how to do that, and we are not knowledgeable of these things, then democratic discussion is of no purpose. The point of what I'm trying to say is asking opinion from people who do not clearly know what they're talking about is pointless. And that should be taken into account in a democratic form of social exchange, information exchange, or even in a government. That is why democratic governments with a lot of poverty and low education somehow would not work and would result to corruption. This is where the concept of market globalism is sometimes somehow geared towards the concept of imperial globalism, because they think that globalization, the hidden agenda of globalization, is spreading democracy, spreading the ideologies of major countries, major governments in a democratic form, imposing their ideologies to all of the nations, which they call imperial globalism, imposing their form of government to other people, which divides the world, which divides these countries. And then again, when we are divided, these major politics, these major governments also have their own way of uniting the world, which bring us to what they would suggest as a sixth core claim of globalism, that we need a war on terror to market globalizations, or to market globalization's discursive arsenal. In order to impose globalization, in order to impose democracy, in order to impose unity among the world, or to create unity again somehow, scholars would say the terrorists, the terror attacks, these somehow what we call enemies, creating larger enemies than the governments, arguing among themselves, would create unity between governments. Imagine if you and your friend are having a conflict at a certain street, and suddenly there is an earthquake. And when the earthquake happens, you and your friend would help each other. Why? Because your problem between the two of you would now seem smaller than than the problem that both of you are experiencing. This is the same thing that happens between conflicts of each of the countries when they face a larger terror attack, a larger enemy. It can be a terroristic attack, or it can be the same as what's happening right now, the pandemic, where the conflicts of each of these countries before were somehow minimized, were somehow erased at a certain time during the pandemic, because we need to help each other, because we need to share information about how to fix the pandemic, how to heal people, how to provide the vaccine, how to keep up with the mutations of this virus and provide a vaccine that would really fight against the virus. So that terroristic attack, that larger enemy unites us. And that's another claim in globalization, that somehow we have to recognize that there's a larger enemy among all of these countries that will be the reason why we need to help each other. This is also where the concept of Americanization, of globalization, comes in. Because somehow America is still a large country. It's still a large market among all markets in the world. And they somehow call it the McDonaldization of the world. Globalization is the Americanization. Globalization is the McDonaldization. Why is this happening? Because we are still driven by the market. We are still driven by the business. Remember the concept of the different types of companies, where there's international, global, multinational, and transnational, where the transnational companies are large enough that they earn larger than countries. When we have to simplify that, one person owning a business may earn larger than a country being run by people. And that alone would help us realize that market globalism is still dominated by economy. Market globalism is still dominated by the market, by the products, by the exchange of resources, which is being done in the business. Those 5 core claims, you have to reflect on it, is what's happening in the world and is what we have to deal with, what we have to act on, the things that we have to develop skills on. Because if we don't have those skills in each of those core claims of globalization, then we will be left out in the development of a global market in the world. That ends our discussion in lesson 3, Market Globalism. Again, this has been Sergio, and as always, I may not see you in the next discussion, but you will surely see me in our next video discussion. Goodbye.